everyone. Thanks for checking out the Indy Handshake Wrestling Podcast. My name is Paul Ponte. I am here today with Michael Mondragon, a.k.a. Disco Machine. How are we doing today?
I'm doing great. I wish I could say that I'm Disco Machine today, but yeah, that guy might have faded away a long time ago.
You know, like disco, it died. You know, it's a product of its time.
Yes. I knew it in the 70s it was going to die. So, you know, it was going to die in the 2000s too.
For anyone not familiar, if you're listening to an indie wrestling podcast, I can't imagine you wouldn't be familiar, but you were one of the PWG Six, one of the people who started Pro Wrestling Guerrilla. I always say, I'm going to say it for the third time now that I've had three of you, one of the most influential indies in America in the 2000s, really when the indie boom hit. And so I've already asked, your fellow members this, but I'd love to get your take on how it started, what your goals were when it was going on, and, that kind of thing.
So it really was born out of our friendship and really our upbringing from Revolution Pro Wrestling with Ron Rivera in the late 90s. And Super Dragon, Excalibur, Mr. Excitement, Rising Sun. There's so many people that made this these little shows out of a garage and a success. And we used to put out tapes. That's what people did in the late 90s, and would do tape trading. And, we would watch tapes but also trade tapes. And when Ron Rivera had the brainchild of kind of creating a group, I think it was like it was between 96 and 98. I met Ron Rivera in 96 at a AAA show in Phoenix. That's where I was living at the time. And he was working for Conan at that time. And so I met him, and eventually I moved out to California in 97. And there was always this kind of like talk in the background of like starting something or doing something, but it really wasn't defined. And we really didn't know how it would work, or would we work for someone else or try it. Really, in a sense, we trained ourselves. Much like the Young Bucks would probably be more comparable today. They just had a ring and they just did stuff, and they watched tapes and consumed it and just tried to create their own style. And it was much like the Bucks. It was very difficult for us to get on other shows. A lot of people saw us as like these outliers. We were training ourselves but also getting training. We were going places. There was actually little lucha groups that we would go to and, try to soak up as much as we could. But we were seen as kind of like really the outsiders at that time. Eventually, we tried to do more and grow outside of it. Super Dragon was like in the King of the Indies at that time in the, what was it? 99 or something like that. It might have been earlier.
2000.
It probably was 2000. Yeah.
Yeah. I believe the first King Indies was 2000. Second was 2001, I believe.
Yeah. So that was like a big deal for someone to be in that company but it got us a lot of great exposure. And then from there we started doing more wrestling like for XPW. And that's where we really kind of hit the second level of like, wow, like, these guys are not your traditional wrestlers, but they're doing something different. And that was really fortunate because there's this like, infamous tag match, Super Dragon and Excalibur and Rising Sun and Taro that really showed that the undercard was like just as good as like the people on top. And it was like, at that time we got a lot of heat for doing those types of things. We were told to like tone it down, not to do as much, but we always fought for that. They brought us there for a reason, and we were going to take advantage of it. And so we did. And when we went other places, it was like a similar thing. So we were seen as kind of like these kind of kids, although I wasn't a kid at the time. I was probably 10 years older than everybody. But I was, but we actually, did all these things and made a name for ourselves. But then eventually we got to the point where we didn't want to, kind of want to start controlling other things and really just to wrestle more, but also do it in a style, but also bring out people that we wanted to wrestle as well. And, that's why, in our first show, we had AJ Styles. Samoa Joe was supposed to be in that match, that very first main event, and he got hurt. But we had a whole bunch of people that were already here. But then flying out people that had names, and I mean that a lot of people weren't doing that in that kind of way at that time. And in 2003 is when we started Gorilla, and at that time nobody expected us to even survive. Like maybe a couple shows at the most. 6 workers all putting together, chipping in and putting the fed together. There's no way this is going to last.
Oh, on paper, it sounds like, too many cooks in the kitchen. There's no way it's going to be bad.
And if you looked at our competition at the time, was New Japan Wrestling was wrestling out of Santa Monica. They had a dojo out there. UPW had WWF or WWE affiliation at that time. Yeah. So we were seen as like, this is cute, and even the place that we wrestled at in our first shows, Frankensons, was run by another promoter who had a promotion there already. So there was, lucha groups and other places. So we were just seen as another place just to have shows. So to grow into what it has now is really, it's great to see. Although I was only there, I like to say that I was there. There's 3 phases of PWG. There was the beginning, there was the transition when I left, and then there was what it is today. So I'm super happy for PWG for their success without me. And I could probably talk more at length about that, but but yeah, it was like they needed to go on without me, and they've totally thrived because of it.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So why do you think they thrived because of it?
Because at the time that I was at that time, so this would have been 2003 through 2007. It was a really tough time in my life, a time that I don't like to reflect back on. Not in a sense of like, I had a drug problem or anything. It was just a lot of things had caught up to me by then, a lot of depression, a lot of, I was divorced, years before. And it's like, I'm wearing this Brody Stevens shirt, because he struggled with a lot of mental illness and eventually lost his life. I'd like to plug something for that later that's involved with him. But one of the things,
positive energy.
Yes, that's right. Enjoy it. and so one of the things that he always put out, that positive energy, and like, push, he's push, it's like, but that's what I was doing. I was pushing, but I was kind of denying the fact that I was struggling at the time. And wrestling is one of those types of things where you can get in the cycle. Like wrestling becomes like almost like a drug in a sense, where the punishment and you do bigger things and you can get hurt more and you start making bad decisions. And I was making bad decisions all the way around. So eventually a lot of it caught up to me. And I had to pull the plug on it. I had to pull the plug on me being in my involvement in it. And it was probably the hardest thing that I've had to do. It's in a sense that, it's like walking away from a business you started, but letting someone else kind of run with the football, as it were. And I really, I said, like, whatever you can make of this, make of it. And a lot of people would think that I'm dumb doing that. But for me, it probably kept me alive, I would say. Because I was struggling a lot, and probably more than I care to admit.
I feel you on that. I've had those issues before. I wasn't running a business, but I've dealt with some of that stuff. Prozac Nation represent. But it is tough, especially because, and it's interesting that you bring up Brody Stevens, because it's a very similar. I mean, I would assume, I was never a wrestler. I trained a little bit, but I was never a wrestler. I would assume the same types of, like, when you're a stand-up comic, you constantly feel like, well, I need to be going out. I need to be going and working every night. I need to be doing a set every night. And I'm sure when you're a wrestler, you're thinking, well, I got to keep getting booked. You got to keep being out there. You got to, I got to, now all of a sudden you're wrestling 4 or 5 times a week or sometimes, and you're like really putting your body and mind through something that maybe it's not necessarily, equipped for.
Yeah, and I'm not sure if people really knew my capacity with Pro Wrestling Guerrilla, because and they probably just saw my matches and like, who is this guy, whatever. And maybe I in a sense, as I grew, I didn't fit in, I felt, but it was only because I was doing so much at that time. So every flyer you saw, I take that back. It's not every bit of it, because Excalibur and Super Dragon were super instrumental in a lot of the production of that stuff. But a lot of the graphics, a lot of the website stuff, a lot of just, all the little stuff that you don't see. Go into Kinko's at 3 a.m. Because that's the only time that you can actually get stuff printed. A lot of the stuff, at the time I was, my son was 2 or 3. I was a divorced dad. I was trying to keep a full-time job. Wrestling wasn't my full-time career either. So I was still trying to train. I was trying to do all this stuff. And I was really like cutting myself thin, and it was super catching up to me. But the one thing, I was just talking to Gabe Ramirez of Pro Wrestling Revolution yesterday about this. And we were talking about how wrestling, just when you think like, okay, I've had enough, this is enough. This is, it's not my vocation, but I'm putting a lot of time and effort of side work into this. And it's become, like simultaneous with like my full-time. I had 2 full-time jobs in a sense. And, but also trying to wrestle on top of that. I'm just like, okay, this is enough. I can't do anymore. Oh my God. Okay. We're going to go to Europe. Damn. Okay. There's an MTV show. My God. We're going to go you want to go to Japan? So that's how those things happen. And you can't plan them sometimes, and they only happen, and it's a small window, and you have to either take advantage of it or you don't. So I tried to do probably too much, and that was that's all a part of learning, and I don't regret any of it now. Back then, I probably would have had a different story, but now I look back on it, and it's like the legacy that I think that I've created, still stands up.
Yeah, absolutely. And interesting you bring up the whole, when you try to get out, even like, I think every aspect of wrestling is like that. My friend Jesus Cruz, who also does this show, and he does a Lucha Libre edition of this show. He was one of the first people in Northern California to start running like consistent Lucha Libre shows. And every time he would like do it for a while, and then he would lose money, and then he would stop. And he'd be like, I'm never running a show again in my life. Yeah. And then like a year later, he's like, so we're going to be running a show. And then like all of a sudden it would start the cycle over and over again. And he's like, even now he's like, well, maybe. I mean, now we just did we're working on like a documentary thing with Michael Mondragon right now. So either way, he gets dragged back into wrestling every chance he gets.
Yeah. And that's a really good point, because I whenever anybody asks me about starting like, a promotion, they're like, oh, I'm thinking about doing this. I'm glad I can put it out now, because I don't have to say it to them personally, because I don't want to crush anybody's dreams. You should definitely start a wrestling promotion if you want to do it. My overall advice is to them, I say, well, whose money are you going to lose? Are you going to lose yours or someone else's? Because that is basically the way it goes. Yes, if you make it into a proper business and do the right channels, you can make money at it. But you have to have just like any startup, just like any business, you have to have a solid business plan to make money and really go through the years. You have to have a 1 week plan, but you also have a 5-year, 10-year plan. So like, are you going to stick around for 5-10 years? So is it just a one-off? Like, how are you going to do this? A lot of people don't take the time to do that. They just really enamored by the wrestling and just want to start a promotion. And that's why you see ones go flame up and flame down, that's, and for PWG, I can speak from experience. I walked away from it, and financially I wasn't in good shape. So, but I've lost, money in other businesses too. If I had an ice cream stand and I lost money, it would be the same lesson.
Yeah, on the Talwar episode, he mentioned basically a lot of their European vacation, / actual work that you guys had to do was funded a lot by you.
Well, and I look back on it, it's like, hey, money is money comes and goes, and it was an opportunity that we all had, and I saw like Quicksilver and Scorpio Sky, Excalibur, all the guys from like RevPro. So we were really trying to just do something. I said I couldn't not make this happen. So I had to do what I could. And I put a lot more labor hours into it, which weren't billable hours. But it was I can look back on it and really be proud.
And I'm going to jump off what I was saying earlier. My friend Jesus Cruz, he told me to ask you about your mask getting stolen. So I'd like to go into that.
Oh my gosh. I'm interested to know how he knows that. And yeah, that's a kind of a, boy, that was a low moment for me, because sometimes when I take off my mask, for those who don't know, I come with it was almost like a little half mask, didn't have a mouthpiece. So in these days of COVID, it wouldn't be a good mask. Let's just say that. So, but I would take it off, and then I would put it down with all my gear, and then someone would take it to the back. Well, like someone during the match just walked up and grabbed my mask and just took it. Said, "Oh, I thought it was just you threw it away or whatever it was." And it was like, but all my other my jacket and my disco ball was all in the back, and I was like, "Where's my mask?" So I found out that someone had actually walked out with it. Luckily, I got it back. And then the next show I came out, I actually took a bike lock and I actually locked it to the post. So yeah, that's funny that you say that. I'm interested to know how he know, or was he the culprit? No,
I don't know. No, that's funny. Like, what do you think? You were Bret Hart giving away your sunglasses to people? Like,
maybe that's in fairness, I didn't say that it wasn't, for everybody, but those things cost a lot.
Yeah. You touched on it a bit earlier, about XPW and Wrestling Society X. I'm pretty good friends with Luke Hawx. Sure. So I'm sure you ran into him on both of those things.
Yeah.
So can you tell me a little bit about your experience in each of those promotions? Because they were XPW specifically was a pretty wild situation. So, reflect on your time.
Yeah, our association with XPW was all through Ron Rivera. He had made some inroads with them, and we started just doing more shows with them. I was saying about the tag match, but I actually had a match with Super Dragon, which kind of gets forgotten in the shuffle, and it's one of my favorite matches. And I actually have one of the most not famous, but it was a infamous botch in it. I actually got knocked out in the match. Excalibur actually kneed me in the back of the head during the match, and I was actually bleeding. So I was knocked, senseless during the match as well. Just our hard style. We always wanted to be harder and better than everybody. But that match really super holds up. And I actually was going to go for a power slam in the corner, and actually went for it too early, and Super Dragon made me pay for it with a double stomp to the face. I'm almost positive that's where the double stomps, his double stomps came in, and it was in the XPW opening for years. So, but that match is actually, I love that match, and it was really special to me. But from there, it was that was our first kind of experience with Kevin Kleinrock. And we started, he always had these projects in the background, and Wrestling Society X was one of them. And all of a sudden he says, we're going to be on MTV and we're going to do this. Would you like to, be a part of this? And I said, of course, it holds up as another thing that's super special that really held up in my career as well. And people look back on it fondly, even though, to people that are probably going to look back at it now, it probably seemed cheesy, or it seemed kind of produced, but the envisionment of it from what it started with, I feel kind of changed with the MTV aspect of it. But I can't complain too much, because MTV loved my character, and we were in the most tag team matches on the show. We were the first tag team winners, and we got to wrestle the Dragon Gate guys. So again, all these dreams, and got to wrestle on this roster with so many great people. And yeah, Luke Hawx was a super big part of that, and he had a tag team too that was a whole faction that really did a lot of big things. And I didn't wrestle with Luke at XPW, but I seem to remember I wrestled somewhere else with him. But yeah, super great guy. I really enjoyed my time there, and it was so special. just to be a part of that. And Kevin Kleinrock, and he was the one that was really, really one of my biggest fans. And I can't thank him enough for all the opportunities he gave me. Same with Ron Rivera, same with Super Dragon Excalibur. So they gave me so many opportunities in this business that I say that I've so overachieved, like way more than I wanted to do. So I wish I could have dedicated more time to in-ring wrestling, but that would have probably meant that I had to make a career change if I got good at it. That's how much I put into everything that I do.
And how was the XPW as far as like locker room stuff? Like, when you're joining up with this group, which just, there's a few stories about XPW, but like, how did they receive like, other people in their locker room?
Well, I think because I was with this crew, they accepted me, and they knew who we were. Their locker room was I mean, it's as crazy as you've heard. Like it was crazy. I mean, during like the XPW days, the ECW days, all that culture, it was exactly what you've heard about it. The fun thing was that wrestling has this kind of, brother type of mentality where it's like, we were all doing the same thing. We all just wanted to have the best match on the show. We all took it really seriously, and it was, it was punk rock. So it was, we were creating something special at the time. We didn't know what we were creating, but it was at the Olympic Auditorium, this very famous arena where like, Bruno Sammartino wrestled and all those LA legends wrestled there, and Elvis wrestled there. That'd be great if Elvis wrestled there. But he performed there, and I saw shows there, and it has such a history. But just to be able to I can say that I wrestled at the Olympic Auditorium. I've wrestled at Caracuan Hall. I've wrestled so many places that I never thought I would ever even like see as a fan. Like, it's like wow, the fact that I actually had a match there is really super special, and I look back on it very fondly.
I saw that you did some stuff with Lucha Promotions here in the States. Did you also go to Mexico at all?
I did. I wrestled in Mexico. Actually, for another project that Kevin Kleinrock had, it was for G4. They were doing a kind of a lucha show. I actually wrestled a tag team match with Human Tornado there. My very first match was in Mexicali in 1998, and it was terrible, and it was just great. I also wrestled. I want to say somewhere else, but I'm forgetting off the top of my head. But the one, the actual one for G4 was actually it was actually a cockfighting ring, and they actually had like some of the feathers and all the chicken wire in there. Wow. But yeah, it was quite. I'm not sure. I'm trying to remember the name of the place, but it was one of those just kind of like, it was so lucha. It was right there in Tijuana. So it was like, it was great. Yeah. So I've wrestled there a couple times, but I actually wrestled more Mexicans and Japanese people who spoke Spanish in Japan, because they all trained in Mexico City.
There you go.
So we spoke Spanish and wrestling when I went to Japan for Osaka Pro.
I was gonna say, because your gimmick goes over. I'm sure went over really well with lucha crowds, because they love that stuff.
Yeah, and it was either one. My character was really unique in the fact that like it wasn't one of those that was on the fence. You either loved it or you hated it. So I was always really lucky in that sense. So if I saw the crowds weren't really appreciating me, I would push that. But if I saw that they were appreciating me, it was very easy just to do the things that a baby face would do, and but also have that kind of like, I'm dancing to get, kind of entrance you or trying to get you out of your element or feel uneasy. Yeah. So it was so fun to do. And I said I wouldn't. I always thought to myself, because my last name is Mondragon, so Mondragon. So I always joke that I was actually the only dragon in wrestling. And there were so many dragons, but I was a real dragon. Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about wrestling in Japan. I also saw that you did the Osaka Pro Sunflower Cruise.
I did. So I wrestled on a cruise ship. It was actually Mr. Excitement and myself. We actually wrestled. It was called Golden Week in Japan. So that it's like they have different days during the week. So like one is Kids Day, one is Grandparents Day. They're all dedicated to different honoring different members of society in Japan. So there's a cruise liner that goes around Osaka. I think it's Osaka Bay, and they had a wrestling ring on this cruise liner. So basically what you do, you pay a ticket and you could walk around. The ship would go around the bay a couple times, and you could go and play games and you can do all the stuff or just look around and stuff like that. But they had wrestling on there. So they actually had a wrestling ring. And I think it was me and Gamma, who was later in Toryumon, and against Black Tiger and Mr. Excitement. So yeah, so we unfortunately on an elbow strike, I bloodied Mr. Excitement's nose. So the young boys had to like clean it after our match. And actually, when I went for a dive, I did like a kind of a mariposa, which is basically just like a tumble outside off the ropes, kind of like similar to an Asai moonsault. But I actually did that, and the ship like kind of moved. So I didn't go backwards. I actually kind of went to the side and landed pretty hard off the shoulder of my opponent. So, but it was oh my god, what a blast! And we actually before we were going to lock up, Mr. Excitement and we actually stopped because we were getting seasick. Like it was so fun. It was just a great time. Yeah, and it was an experience that you could never get if you just didn't travel around or do these types of things.
And how about the rest of Japan? Working, I'm kind of curious because when you're wrestling the States, Mexico, and Japan, how was it as far as the crowds? Working the crowd, how did the crowd respond to you? That kind of thing.
So one of the interesting things about working for Osaka Pro was it was geared towards kids, and it was the actual Delphin Arena was in this area of Osaka where they have like a big like merry-go-round, and if you go up a couple levels, there's like a roller coaster, and there's video games, and there's plenty of stuff to do in this kind of amusement area. So they would have like these, shows on different days, and then the weekend shows where like one was a Saturday night like TV taping, and then they would do these other types of shows. So like the Saturday shows were always like the big shows that were going to get taped. So, but the one thing that I heard about like in Japan that they asked was like, they go, oh, you take off your mask, and I'm like, yes, I do. And then what really intrigued me was they wanted to see my American face, which really super intrigued me. So like they were happy that I had something where I could like reveal and stuff like that. And the fact that I was very entertainment based was they loved that. So coming out under a disco ball and having the referee do it, and they all wanted to like hold it at some point, and they would work around it and stuff like that. So it was really well accepted, and the fact that I was more entertainment based always got me further in wrestling than any move I ever did. Like you guys were talking about the Canadian Destroyer, which I say is the new Shining Wizard, which is the new Sunset Flip, but that like I didn't have to do any crazy moves to actually have an impact in wrestling. They just wanted me to just go out there and entertain. And but I always tried to be the best wrestler I could. And I trained, in pro wrestling, American style, but I also trained in the New Japan dojo for a while. They also had lucha classes there. I trained at Gil's Garage to be a better lucha worker. And it super helped me because in Osaka Pro, they were all working lucha. So if I didn't learn that, I think I would have had a much harder time, but it was all cake. And it was so fun. And everything, it was like knowing a different language that no one else knew. And what a lot of people don't know is, American style, you lock up this way, but a lucha style, you lock up the other way. So everything is opposite. So it's so fun just to be able to have that interchangeable work both sides of your brain, not just always going after one body part all the time. Yeah.
Yeah, you shouldn't sell your ring style short at all. I enjoyed, your ring style. If anything, when I first saw PWG and I saw you come out, I was on the fence. I'm not going to lie about the gimmick. I was like, let me see where this goes. Cause I was like, it's wrestling. So you never know where it's going to go. And I saw you work and I was like, no, this dude can work. I like him. Okay. So I like the gimmick. See, I just don't, to me, there still has to be some aspect of good wrestling in it too. Yeah. So like your gimmick was entertaining, but you were also a good wrestler. So I'm okay with that. If you have someone who's purely, all entertainment and in the ring, they're the shits. Well, I'm sorry, but I don't care how entertaining you are. You could be a manager.
Oh yeah. Yeah. No, it gets really, like real fast. You get fed up with it. I totally get that. But I always wanted to improve. Just as a group, I mean, I think that's why Revolution Pro, we are always hungry to learn and fight and be more than we were. And a lot of the stuff that we saw, like that was going on at that time, I take that back. It was a lot of the attitude area. So like we kind of got swept into that. I think that a lot of people forget that's where we all started. And a lot of the stuff that was, a lot of the humor at that time, a lot of the stuff that was going on, it was all influenced on that because it was all about pushing buttons.
Yeah.
And definitely like getting a rise. You were talking about comedians earlier. I mean, comedians are now doing that. Some are getting out of the business because they're like, can't even talk to, people now without, comedy has to be for every single person. And I'm just like, that's the great thing about comedy, that it isn't for everybody. It's like these, again, it's like a secret language that like only certain people kind of get. But yeah, you're right. It's, but I think that, we always try to be more, we also took influence from a lot of stuff like All Japan Wrestling. Like a lot of stuff was all geared toward like getting to WWE. We wanted to be like, Misawa Kobashi or Kawada and stuff like that, but mix it with the New Japan Juniors. But then bring like Michinoku Pro and Toryumon and T2P during that time. Like, well, that's who we wanted to be because we knew our identity. But we weren't going to be these huge hulks that were going to go out there and kind of, do that type of match. And because we were really self-realistic about that. But we could have like, the pacing, the faster pacing that was really kind of more in our, that we loved, that we saw, that we really wanted to imitate.
Yeah, I was, speaking of Misawa, I had a chance to meet him and when he was over here for Pro Wrestling Iron. Wow. I was working for Pro Wrestling Iron at the time. And, obviously it's one of those things where you kind of just like, hello, sir. And then you just kind of walk away because it's Misawa. But what's it called? It's interesting that you were talking about like the different styles of wrestling, the comedy, because one thing I envy about, and I'm sure there's a lot of sticklers in Japan about like old school wrestling, just like there is here. But I feel like it's a lot more prevalent here as far as like people, they're so on the side of the fence of like, there's so many like the cornet of it all, just the whole, there can't be anything ridiculous at all, no matter what. Meanwhile, in Japan, it's like, you can have a hard-hitting, stiff dudes basically getting dropped on their head for 20 minutes straight. And you can also have like, Kikitaru and all kinds of, you know what I mean? Like, you could just have like different things. And, like Misawa loved when Modest he would drop an elbow. He would go back, drop another elbow, and he would come back, and then he would walk on the guy's back instead, or his stomach, and he would just smile and go like this.
Yes.
Which apparently in Japan is like a thing that shows like weakness to smile.
Okay. How interesting.
So the crowd ate that up. They thought it was hilarious that he would be like beating someone up, and then he would thumbs up and give it like a big cheesy grin.
Yes.
But Misawa loved that. Yes. Even though he's in the middle of like a hardcore, like, pretty technical match. So I don't know.
Super Delphin was when I saw how he ran that promotion, it really changed my whole perspective on how, like, I'm a Super Delphin, right? This guy who's had these amazing matches, Michinoku Pro, wrestled in New Japan, and I thought that it was going to be like this kind of like go over there and it's going to be like, oh my God, like it's going to be all that style. Oh my God. Like he wanted to have like the easiest promotion he could. Sometimes we'd have these 20-minute matches and like the intros would be 10 minutes long in addition to a 20-minute match that we did nothing but entertain. And it was so fun to see like, wow, there's a whole different entertainment aspect of this. And plus they have to do this like so many times that you can't have those types of matches every single week for that amount of time without your body breaking down. And unfortunately, you brought up Masawa before. There's a thing within wrestlers we always talk about. You only have so many bumps in you, and you don't want your last one to be in the ring. And it very well could be, and it was for him, which is super tragic. And when I saw that, it broke my heart. But if anybody's gonna, literally die in the ring, it was gonna be him, because he dedicated his life to professional wrestling.
Yeah, actually, in that match, another guy, Bison Smith, I used to do his website. I was friends with him. He was in the match when it happened, and and then he ended up passing away, unfortunately, as well in Puerto Rico. Yeah. Sometimes, I'm not gonna lie, like I've worked for indie promotions for since like the late 90s, early 2000s, and sometimes, man, it's a bummer. I'm not gonna lie. It's just like you either see like these WrestleCons that they hold, and they get these big name wrestlers who are like basically begging for autographs at like WrestleCons, and they can barely walk and their knees are shot. And then you see like all these wrestlers, even the guys in the indie scene. It's not just the big guys who like die too young, and it's a crazy business. And I don't know why I love it so much, but it's it's one of those things. So
well, you know why you probably love it still is because wrestling hasn't taken enough away from you yet. So a lot of people that are trying to get out of it, they haven't found that other thing that really motivates them more than wrestling. So wrestling still holds a lot of, like love. And it's so funny because like people will say to me like, you still love wrestling. You still love wrestling. I go, well, no, I love my son. Wrestling is something that I can close the door and walk back into. So I've really super had to define that, because there was a time that I was giving up more of myself for wrestling than wrestling kind of deserved. And especially when I got hurt, like when I got a staph infection on my elbow. It was when I looked over at my arm one day, and I was at work, and I was like, oh my gosh. And I put my fingers into here, and it was like one of those memory foam. And I'm like, ooh, something's wrong. And I thought to myself, like, my vocation is graphic design. So it's like, if I don't have my arm, like, am I going to do this with like, a wand out of my mouth or something like that? Or like, what am I going to do? So I really defined that. I said, like, if I get hurt, if the wrestling ring doesn't care if I get hurt. It's still going to be there. They're going to set up another ring. They're going to have another show. So I really had to kind of define the balance between that. So, but I really admire anyone who really does this for a profession, because it's not easy. It is not easy on the body, and it's a marathon. It's not a sprint.
Yeah. So speaking on that, I wanted to know what your opinion is as far as how the indie scene changed, as far as not just, we all know how it changed. We know that, indie scene got big after, WWE basically swallowed everything up and became its own thing. Then finally the indies got big because people needed and craved an alternative. Please. I know I did. I stopped watching them maybe a decade and a half ago, and I still haven't really gone back. But I wanted to know how wrestlers changed, how like the feeling was like in locker rooms, like, cause you were there, 90s until 2012, I believe you retired. Yeah. So that's a good chunk of time that you kind of saw how the industry changed in the indie scene. So can you speak a little bit on that maybe?
Oh, well, it's so funny because like the people that I wrestled back then are current now, wrestling Cesaro, Kevin Steen, Kevin Owens, Sami Zayn, all American Dragon, Bryan Danielson. So like all those people are now like, they're mainstays now, but they all came up during the time that I was wrestling. And that is, so there's a lot of that old, like, we really had to, we had to do things kind of differently back then. There was a lot of like more networking and trying to get our name out there. Now it's like with YouTube and social media, it's super different. And I also think I have this for my other businesses that I talk about, that you have to keep, if your business is professional wrestling, you should definitely put out professional wrestling all the time. I think that's one reason why like MJF is a perfect example of like sticking to wrestling. Like you won't see like a recipe on his Twitter, right? If you do, it's going to mean something towards what he's trying to accomplish. But he is very in character, and a lot of people kind of question, like, "Oh, is this guy for real, or is this an act?" I mean, like, who can you say that about these days, right? Mm-hmm. So, social media has made everybody really accessible, but almost too accessible in some senses. So that's why I love, like, I always liked this. If George the Animal Steel had a Twitter, like that would ruin that guy's gimmick, right? Yeah. It's like, come on. It's like, but the fact that you thought that he was like this animal and he actually acted like that all the time, and you didn't see him on social media and stuff like that. That kind of created his aura. So that, I think that's one big difference. But then a lot of people have taken great advantage of that. The Bucks have done great with their show, and now that what they're doing now. Other people have been involved in that, but they see the power of the internet. I think at a time, I think it was when I was kind of getting out of it, people were still trying to do TV, and TV kind of changed the definition. I was trying to kind of give some insight to like YouTube and Amazon and Hulu and all these different platforms that were begging for content like these people were putting out. And it was kind of seen as kind of like, not so much. We have these other things. We know what we're doing. But now in 2020, like that stuff has really grown, and it's like where it's all at. And people, like, I was watching the IWA Mid-South Deathmatch Tournament and New Japan World, and we're watching DDT. The DDT tournament is going on right now, and that's all online, and is exactly where like professional wrestling should have been right now, and or should be right now. But back then, I was like, this is all changing. It's not going to be the go to the TV and like we used to do. So but as far as locker rooms go, it's like it's been so long since I've been in a locker room that I can't really speak on that, but. I remember everything, I think we were in a bubble because I didn't realize it looking back on it until recently, that I'm like looking around, like all the people that are in wrestling now, how many people actually came up and came through here? I didn't have to go somewhere else to see all these people. They came to us because they wanted to wrestle here. They wanted to be a part of everything we were doing. So I was really fortunate to be in that little window and have the connections that I did to do the things that I did.
It's interesting you mentioned like Hulu and Netflix. I am pretty shocked that Hulu, Netflix, or all of them hasn't like tried to snatch up like a PWG or something to have like an actual weekly show. Purely because, I mean, I listened to the Eric Bischoff's 83 Weeks podcast, and he's half full of shit most of the time anyway because he's a salesman, because, that's what he is.
Sure.
I know what he is. I listen with full open ears. But one thing he does mention is that wrestling, in comparison to other content on television, is a lot cheaper to produce, and you get weekly content out of it instead of making like a Netflix original movie probably cost them $60-70 million.
Yeah.
And how much stuff could you get out of wrestling with that? So to me, I'm kind of shocked that like a Hulu or someone hasn't already tried to pick up something as far as wrestling goes, just to have something on there. Because really,
I don't know the TV business either. Well, I understand having connections and doing all that stuff, but like one of the huge advantages was that I could see how, you could have your own proprietary content and then integrate merchandise into it and do eventually there was going to be a pay gateway, and that's what they're doing now. You do basically pay for like Fight TV, you pay for all the pay-per-views and stuff like that. I really kind of saw all this stuff coming at the time. I was probably too far ahead of it, and people didn't. I probably didn't know how to present it correctly, but I'm like, this stuff is coming. You should definitely think about it. But I don't think a lot of people put a lot of thought into it because they already had plans. Vince
McMahon bought the WCW library and the NWA library for, if you think about it now, ridiculously cheap, because nobody could even fathom the idea of having a streaming service with everything available.
Yes. And I remember when that happened, that was exactly my mentality too. And I was like, wow, they just sewed up everything for that network. That time, that network wasn't even a thing. It was like
Nope.
kind of a thought, and now it's a thing. I also think that reality TV really skewed everything. Like everybody went after that, and that there's other companies that went after reality based content, and that really. Again, I don't know television. I don't know that whole industry, but I think that was a big disruption in wrestling. And everybody started chasing that type of stuff and started getting away from the thing I love, which was athletics and wrestling and the pro wrestling aspect of it. Like, but again, I grew up there in that era when that was all special. And they're trying to cater to this, newer, faster paced audience, that didn't even know about, like Kamala just died and like don't even know who Kamala is, and so that I can understand that going after that. But I think that skewed kind of one thing that I loved about wrestling, which was that's why I like it about New Japan. It's like, it's athletic. It doesn't try to trick you every time they do something. Like, I feel like wrestling is all booked now just to trick me. Like, oh, I thought that was coming. Nope, we're going to do something totally different. So, I mean, that kind of like, you have to keep this kind of cadence going to kind of build to things. I mean, TV shows do it. We all come down on TV shows that don't do that. Yeah. Other things, The Sopranos ended badly and people are still talking about that,
Yep.
So, but that's the whole thing. But that just shows how, like, what a great show. It can even, have a clunker at the end, in some people's opinion.
Yeah. Well, it's like The Walking Dead. I don't know if you watched The Walking Dead ever, but they had like a big tease with like a character death and they did a fake out and everyone was like, oh, okay, so I guess he's not going to die. And then they ended up killing him again anyway. So it was kind of like, what was the point of the fake out? And then that's when and then I found out lots of people apparently turned it off for good. And they just went, I'm done being jerked around. I'm sorry, I'm done. And wrestling needs to learn how to do that as well. Do you need this many false finishes every single night? No, maybe start spreading those out a bit. We mentioned it before, the Canadian Destroyer thing. I mean, that's just everyone likes to name check that as being the one thing, but it's really a lot of different moves. Is there's a lot of stuff that gets kind of spammed. And it needs to kind of relax a bit. I don't know.
Well, yeah, and then that comes down to like match structure. It's like, I don't think there's really a definition of like what kind of match they're supposed to be having. So I think they're always trying to get over their characters so much, and they're trying to stay within times. They're trying to keep on the scripted thing, that the match seems to be like the last thing they worry about. Right? Because they can now edit it all together, and titles don't mean anything. So, like, how can a title be prestigious? That's where I think that New Japan has really done well, where they say like what the title defense is, how many champions they've had. When someone says that I don't want the 6-man titles anymore, like, we're going to have a tournament because we need to fill these slots.
Yeah.
So it actually, keeps all that and it keeps the interest of, the people. That's why I've kind of reinvigorated myself in the pandemic time by watching that again. It's like, it's been great because, and their empty arena shows were nothing like the WWE ones. They were so great.
Yeah, I just there was one where, like I said, I haven't really watched WWE in a while, but every once in a while, you'll see clips pop up on Twitter and everything. And I saw one where it was a guy, he slid out and he did like a Canadian Destroyer, right? Like under the rope, he did like a sliding out to the floor. But it was very obvious in the first camera angle, he was doing a baseball slide. And then they retaped the move and cut it. And it was very obvious. And I was like, you got to do a little better than that. I'm sorry. But if I could see the seams like immediately, I'm like, come on, man. I know we're taping stuff, but have a little bit of respect for your audience.
Yeah, and it's so funny because, like, I mean, I see those, a similar thing happened before with I can't remember the guy in WWE, what his name is, but he did a thing where he jumped. It was kind of like, I think Leo Rush did it too. Or no, Ricochet, I think, did it, where he did the flip and landed on his feet outside. And it's super impressive, but it's like, it's just more like a presentation. Like, I just did this stunt outside, but it's like, it doesn't lead to a victory. It doesn't lead, that Canadian destroyer should have it would have been great if it was a count out, or it led to something where you use another head move, another pile driver, where it's like, that puts you out. But it was more like filler. So it's, and as someone who, I mean, it's funny now that now that I'm out of wrestling, it's so much easier to analyze wrestling, because when you're a wrestler, you're trying to get that reaction from a crowd. And now in a non-crowd environment, like, what exactly is the mission?
Yeah.
So you would think it would be to win the match, but the way that the matches go, like, winners and losers really don't matter.
Yeah, I thought when Scott Lost was on here, he made a really good point that I never thought of. He was like, because he was a wrestler and I'm not, and he was like, oh, I can tell that like the pacing's off in the match.
Yes.
I can tell that normally they're like waiting for some kind of a crowd reaction for something, but then they're not.
Yeah.
So then they just kind of keep going, and it messes up the flow. And I'm like, interesting. Like, I can't really notice it because, I'm not a wrestler. So, but I'm like, that's very interesting. Like, that's something, I imagine might drive you insane if you're a wrestler and you're watching it. But I hate to turn this into a WWE bitch fest, because this is an indie wrestling thing, but I just want to also point out that in the 10 or 15 years or so that I stopped watching, they decided to do something interesting, quote unquote, with their camera angles by zooming in and out during every move. Yeah. And so now, even when I just look for highlights of stuff, because I heard a match was good, I'm like, I can't watch this. This is really bad. So I don't understand what they're doing. To me, AEW's camera work is better, but there's still some stuff that annoys me. My favorite camera work is New Japan. New Japan, they film everything like it's a sport. You could see all the moves clearly. You know what's happening. If somebody's grabbing someone's arm to get ready to do something, you see when he's grabbing the arm. Like, you know when it's going to happen. I'm like, that to me.
And they're really good at that, because if you think about it, like, New Japan actually does storytelling when they do those. Like, then they like when the bell rings, they always have that great shot where it would just like go, pan straight in. It goes right to the ring. It tells like, that's the way that they would do it. Every so often, when there's like in the middle of a match, they would fade away and they show the belt. Remember, it's for this. This is the belt that we're going for. So they're telling little stories, even in the moves at the end of the match. Like, if something the guy is working on the hand, they would like key in on the hand, and then the guy would come and stomp on it. It's just those little subtle storytelling elements. But like, if you're shaking it, it's like, it's all it's saying is like, there's an earthquake, or like, is the cameraman being assaulted as well? So I understand why they're doing it. The effect, I don't think is I think the effect is lost in a sense because of that.
I think the only company that really pulled it off was like when ECW would do it, because they wouldn't even do it that extreme. They would just like, sometimes the wide cam would just be like, oh, and that was all it would do. It would just go in real quick and then back out. Like when somebody was doing like a pile driver in the middle of the ring or something. But
you bring up a good point. A fan cam, like that it was shaky footage, and it was like, it just seems like outlaw and rogue and stuff like that. But you're right. But then they kind of incorporated it into their regular show as well, as like that kind of like that grittiness. It didn't,
because it matched the rest of the promotion.
It was unrefined, and that's what ECW was all about. We're the rogue, or we're the punk rock, we're all those guys. Absolutely.
Yeah. So when you see something super polished like WWE is, and then all of a sudden they're like shaking the camera, you're like, why? What's going on?
Yeah.
It's anyway. But back to the indies, because
of course.
So I also wanted to know maybe about the European vacation that you guys did. I wanted to know how you found, wrestling in England and in Germany. Like, what was that like?
So Super Dragon was actually going over to Germany for, I think, WXW during that time, and he was wrestling El Generico at that time. Kevin Steen was going over there as well, and they were having these really great matches. And one of the things that Super Dragon told me was that, like, these crowds are amazing. Like, there was no seats, and they would just cram them into this little club, and they would get on the ring, and the ring was a little bit smaller, so it wasn't like you could do a lot of stuff on the ring. But I think that was kind of to the advantage of people that could do without rope stuff. You could do rope stuff, but it wasn't super, like, you couldn't do a lot of springboards, stuff like that. But the crowds were so, like, they loved it. And it was such an intimate feeling. I think on our first night was Germany. in Essen, and I wrestled Tommy End, who is now Aleister Black. He was just a skinny kid at that time, and I love that he's gone on to do great things. And it was Excalibur, myself, and Ronan versus Tommy End, Tenkwa, and Top Gun Tall War. And then one of the things that I'm not sure if Top Gun touched on this, but they actually Tenkwa said after the match, he goes, "Oh my gosh, we're so happy to wrestle you. It's been a pleasure." And I'm like, "Oh, thank you so much. It's like, you guys are great, and it's been a lot of fun." But they're like, "No, you don't understand. Like we used to get videotapes of you wrestling in Revolution Pro." So we're like, that blew my mind. That somebody in Germany was actually watching the stuff that we were doing, like, let's say it would have been like 7 years earlier. And it's like, that's crazy that it got all the way over there, and that people were really like what it inspired them to do this. Like, it was crazy. And that was, Super Dragon, his vision of everything and wrestling and who we should be. He really infused us with a lot of like more character, but also like helped us push the limits of what we could do. I'm not sure that I would have done half of what I did risk wise if it wasn't for him. So it was great in that sense. He helped us structure matches better. The next night was in England, and wrestled Spud, Drake Maverick now in WWE. So that was so much fun, because that was even though it was like probably an hour plane flight, it's totally different crowd, just as hot. They weren't beating on the ring or anything, but they were super respectful, and it was so much fun just to see, like, have people know who we were and what we did, and PWG, and something we had, just a vision in our minds at one time was like, we went to Europe to do this. It was absolutely incredible.
Interestingly enough, so I guess that's a pretty universal feeling, because when Misawa came to wrestle here for Pro Wrestling Iron, he told Michael Modest afterward that he was pleasantly surprised and shocked that they started the Misawa chant.
Yes.
And he was like, and this is like Misawa, who's like, like in Japan, he's everything. But even he comes here, he's just like, I can't believe they knew the chant.
Yes.
How weird. Like, even he was like, oh man.
But
so,
that's how we are with wrestling. Like Kishimbo Kamen said the same thing. Like because there's a whole cadence in the Ebisan and Kishimbo matches where it's like, Kushimbo, they do that, then they do Ebisan, but then they do it for the referee, whoever the referee was. So he was amazed that they actually knew the whole cadence of what they do before a match. And it's just because we all are wrestling nerds and we watch too much wrestling.
I wanted to also kind of touch on, all the traveling you're doing, all the stuff you guys are doing, but I wanted to know about road stories. I think wrestlers kind of live, I call it second childhood, where you're buddying up with, other grown adults, but you're basically doing sleepovers and crashing and doing all kinds of stuff. So what was any funny road stories you could think of, anything that pops into your mind?
Oh my gosh. Well, I mean, my road stories are brutal only because I used to do all the driving. I used to have a 98 Mustang that I think I got like when I first, right about a year after I moved here. So the fact I got a new car meant that I was going to drive everywhere, and I was eager and ambitious to do all these things. So it didn't really matter to me, but there was a lot of I can say I should actually go back and curse everybody, but they should really thank me a lot, because I did a lot of driving during that time. And we used to go up, I was telling you about Gabe earlier, we used to drive up from the guys from Anaheim would drive up to where I lived in Silver Lake, which is close to Dodger Stadium. Then I would pick that, and I would drive from there we would drive up to Hayward for Gym Wars up there. Would we stay over? No, we would drive back that night. And if like Gym Wars were on Friday, so if LA, so driving from Long Beach or Anaheim, so they would probably have to leave at like noon. They probably get there about 2. I would get into traffic about 3 if I'm lucky, but that is like in LA, awful traffic. So I would have to hit that and then into San Francisco and then wrestle and do a lot of stuff, turn right back around and do the same thing. And there was times where it was driving when you're asleep or drowsy is more dangerous than driving drunk, because when you're driving drunk, I'm not speaking from experience, but at least you're trying to drive. But like when you're nodding off, and especially after, there's a lot of adrenaline in wrestling, obviously. So doing those long trips of going up there and then you eat something and we're not leaving until like maybe after midnight and getting home like 4 o'clock in the morning, 5 in the morning. So those were, in the early years, those were grinds. Those were awful. And then you would have like fringe people that would come with you because we always had to have somebody to tape, right? So this other person that wasn't in there, that at that time it was all about getting footage and putting it out there, getting footage of our matches. So I have a story of this one guy. So I actually, instead of driving back to where I lived in LA, I had to drive back to Anaheim, which was brutal because I would have had to come back again. So I did some crazy stuff. But he was the last one to get dropped off. And I go, "Oh, so where do you live?" And he goes, "I don't know." How do you not know? And he goes, "Yeah." I'm like, I've never driven this way, and so I don't know where I live. And I'm like, I'm super tired. I've had like a day and a half of wrestling, and I'm like, I'm ready just to open the door and just turn sharply to the left and let this guy roll out. But the wrestling kind of attracts like a lot of people like that don't sweat the details about where they live. They're like, "Oh, just go down. I think it's by the beach." And it turns out it was Beach Boulevard. And of course we went north instead of south. And this is like, so those were the type of days that I don't miss. But then, when you start doing more traveling, I was just taking bigger people like to wrestling shows. Like we would go to Bakersfield and like Chris Hero and Davey Richards, like we'd go up there, or Cole Cabana. And then it was like, there was a lot of driving between here and LAX. So I was the driving guy a lot, but in addition to all the other things I did, there was other people that did driving, and Top Gun had basically a room where everybody stayed. So it was like, one of those, if these walls could talk type of thing. So that's basically it. Nothing too tragic happened on the road. I'll probably remember something later, but that was really, when you talk about road stories, that was my another one of my gifts to the road was my driving. And I got everybody there safely.
Fair enough. Yeah, I would imagine, especially, new car, they're probably like, "Oh, and you got AC? Everything's wonderful."
Oh, that was even a bigger thing. Totally. Yeah.
Especially in SoCal.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So, all right, brother, it's about that time. The booker has ran out. It's time to take it home. So we got some, although I will say you are very filled with knowledge, and I might ask you at some point to come back on again. But
I'd love it.
Until then, let's go ahead, and these are some rapid fire questions. You probably know the deal already, but if you feel like any stories or any digressions, please feel free. There's no hard rules on time limits. So here we go. What is your favorite move or hold that you did not use?
Oh, great one. So, wow, that is a great one, because there's so many. When I learned like lucha, and I would watch all the Toryumon, T2P, there were so many of them that I just wanted to do just to see if I could do it in a match. They were so intricate. And there was this one that I want to say that, oh gosh, now I'm going to forget the guy's name. There was a lucha guy that did this really. It was something special, and I know that it's going to come to me right after we shut down. But there was a move that I wanted to do that was like that. It was such an awesome pinning combination that involved like grabbing the arms from behind, twisting them over. You do this whole thing, but it was so fluid and beautiful that. And I tried to use more lucha in my matches because it was one of those things that looked so intricate, but at times it was like they were really simple to do, and all your opponent has to do is actually just kind of sit there and just go with it, and but they would be so tied up in the end that it was so impressive. So I can't remember right off, but there's all these wacky, we call them wacky lucha submissions that we wanted to use. Yeah, that I've always wanted to use. I tried to get away from like the head drops and stuff like that. I mean, those are the ones that obviously people love to see because they're so brutal. But like when I watch like Zack Sabre like do all those lucha, I mean, those things look amazing and they're so fluid, and he can go float from one to another, and that's what's so fun about lucha.
That's why I loved watching like him versus Will Ospreay, because their styles can be any more different. So when they're like fighting each other, it's just like a great one of those, like, you know, when you see two completely different styles fight each other, it's so wonderful. I love stuff like that.
and the announcer would always say, like, you know, you've taken away 90% of his offense by keeping him grounded. You know, like it's so true, because you can't do that stuff off the ropes if you're tied up.
Speaking of head drops and such, what's the injury tally count?
Oh, this is one I actually say to people that didn't know that I wrestled. I say that I have chipped teeth, lacerations, separated shoulder, and more concussions than I care to admit. So I'm lucky that I've gotten to what my friends say, an advanced age. I don't have back trouble. I don't have knee trouble. Little things tweak, like my shoulder. I've lost kind of a lot of strength in my shoulder. I separated my shoulder back in high school in baseball, but and that eventually it's just like one of the things that you kind of work around. But I've lost a lot of strength in my shoulder that I'm currently trying to rehab. Scott Loss actually tried to get me back into like a push-up regimen, and I was like having a lot of more trouble than I expected in my shoulder. So I'm a big baseball fan, so I was thinking about having the Tommy John surgery or the rotator cuff surgery. No, I'm just because I'm a big fan. But I could theoretically have rotator cuff surgery at this point, but I'm not gonna risk it. So I'm just gonna try to work it back in. I'm about 20 pounds under my fighting weight, as it were, when I was wrestling. So, but yeah, it's like that. The injury thing is something that I'm just glad I didn't destroy myself in my 20s. I destroyed myself in my 30s. Yeah. So it was I had a little bit of buffer.
Speaking of injuries, and you don't have to name any names, but have you encountered working with someone who maybe was a little bit more, I know you guys like to work stiff, but maybe someone that was a little bit more stiff than you were expecting, and you kind of had to push back a little bit in the match?
So funny, because in our lucha training, we would actually go to these lucha like training sessions with like the luchadors. And at the time, because I was wrestling with like Superboy, if you remember him, he was in like Michinoku Pro. He was out here. Durango Kid was another guy that was, he was in New Japan. That's another name. I can't remember. But one of the things that when we would go to these practices, we were told, like, kind of watch out for yourself, because there's guys there that are not going to like that these gringos are coming in. And, even though I'm technically, my last name is Mondragon. So if you roll your R's, but a lot of people wouldn't consider me Spanish or Mexican. So but they didn't like these, they probably like invading these territories, right? And trying to learn this art form. But I had a guy one time. I had my shoulder. I had bursitis in my elbow, and I had like a elbow pad on it. And this one lucha guy would give me a hard time about it. He goes, "Why do you wear that? Why do you wear that?" And I'm like, "Because I have an injury." He goes, "Yeah, you can't be in here with like that." Because it was always about like not wearing knee guards and not wearing elbow pads. And I'm like, yeah, I'm going to protect myself because I know my body. And there was a lot of that kind of like false stuff. Or if you would get in a hold, they always said to kind of be aware, because they would do the little joint things, like, the elbow or the bone on bone thing, or the bone on the hip. Like they would take the hip bone and put their elbow into you. Wow. And just, yeah, the little stuff that you wouldn't, that you couldn't see, but you would, they would take advantage of you like that. So I'm not saying everybody would do that, or I've had that done to me, but that was always a thing to be leery of. but there's other people like in the American pro wrestling that were more kind of like, I don't know, just fussy and just didn't like the kids aspect of being in wrestling, even though these kids eventually come, are seasoned veterans and remember all that stuff. And when they're looking for work and they don't get that, they get that treatment. They're not accepted widely or looked upon favorably. So yeah, there's always those little things, but I forgot about a lot of that stuff, but it was very prominent. But yeah.
It reminds me of Luke Hawx right now. He tags with his son, actually. His son's maybe 21, 22, really young. Yeah. Good worker though, for his age, only being in the business a couple of years, pretty good worker. But when they did wrestling they went to the Crash Lucha in Mexico, they did a tag match and his kid got taken advantage of hard. They basically took away.
Really?
They basically took away all of his shine in the match. They screwed him completely in the thing. And after he's like, well, he's got to learn that, there's only so much I can do to help. Like,
yes,
you still got to, you're in the ring. You still got to work. Like, so it's kind of one of those things where
we used to have those matches. We used to have matches and they would fast count us. Like here we go. And I was like, what the hell is that count? Like, it was like, I saw this guy, that's not his count. They would do that little stuff like that just to kind of see what you would do and kind of push all that. And I was like, wow, like, like this happens, but it's like, it's also part of it's part of the punk rock, like learning about it. And, I always say too, it's like, it's learning how the hot dogs are made. You're going to find out some of the bad things about hot dogs if you find out how they're made.
Well, it's kind of like you hear a lot of the stories about some of the world famous superstars that you grew up like watching. Shawn Michaels was like my favorite wrestler growing up completely. And then I found out he was a dick, and I was like, oh well, that kind of sucks. I kind of wish I didn't know that, but hey, it is what it is. So I feel like there's a lot of that with wrestling. Once you start to find out like the ins and outs, you start to kind of appreciate some things a little bit more and other things a little bit less. But yeah, that's the way it goes.
Yeah. They always say don't meet your heroes. I mean, I met Roddy Piper. He was so sweet, and I was really lucky to meet him because he was one of the influential people growing up that I loved during that time. So to meet him, it was great. But they always say, like, especially in this business, or I just want to say this business, the wrestling business, they might be having a bad day. They're not, sometimes people are not very sociable. Yeah. So they're not going to always have like, hey, everybody, hi, it's like, they're just kind of like gruff, and that's just the way that they are. So, I mean, I hate to think that I had a bad day and met someone and that's the way they think of me forever.
Well, I know when I was like working, I was doing a website for a company called Big Time Wrestling. I was doing that. I was taking photos and whatever. So I got to meet a lot of guys coming through. I mean, they would bring in guys like, Billy Gunn when he was still in the WWF, like when he was still wrestling regularly. Like they brought in Bret Hart for autograph signings. They brought in like all these guys, and I had to learn pretty quick how to not mark out because nobody wants that guy around. So then like I learned mostly just to talk to them about anything except for wrestling. Then all of a sudden they were very like responsive. They're like, oh yeah, you know what? I did see that. Well, like they were talking about like movies and shit. They're just like, oh yeah, I'm cool with that. Okay. And all of a sudden they would like relax a bit because last thing you want is if Bret Hart's there, I'm not gonna be like, so WrestleMania 12. He doesn't want that. He doesn't want that.
I actually during that time we actually went up to Big Time Wrestling, and I think Buddy Rose was wrestling up at that time, and actually we picked him up I had to pick him up at the airport and take him to his hotel. And it was such a trip. Just I mean, like Buddy Rose, like a lot of people don't know who he is, but he was like a guy he was in the very first WrestleMania, very first match of WrestleMania. Like a lot of people don't even know, but he was under a mask. But he was. When you start meeting these people on a personal level, it's like this guy, it's like, and then I made a wrong turn. So he was like, he's all like, oh, this is wrong turn Mondragon or something like that. So he actually was really nice. I mean, but I hear that there are people that are not great, but that's in every profession. But you're right. You can't be too starstruck. And then when you start treating them as humans and stuff like that, it's like you find out it's like you have a lot in common with them.
Yeah, we got a lot of double up from SoCal we got like Kazarian and Daniels and all these guys would come up all the time. And like, I remember the longest conversation I ever had with Kazarian was about Metallica. It wasn't anything to do with wrestling.
Yes,
we were just like, I think, I forgot what album had just come out, but we were just bullshitting about Metallica for like 15 minutes. And that was the longest conversation I ever had with a guy. It was based on Metallica. So yeah.
I have a funny thing about Kazarian. I have a 1-0 record over Kazarian. I have a 1-0 record over Spanky, and I'm 1-0 in Caraco and Hall. And all of that I should be 0 for 1 easily. Like like there's no way I should have that. But Frankie's an awesome guy. Spanky's amazing, and all good friends. And so that's it's funny that you say Kazarian, because I always say like I only wrestled him once, and it was in PWG too.
He was one of those guys where like when I saw him and Daniels work in NorCal, I was like, oh man, like these are the two smoothest workers I've ever seen in the ring. Like I was just like, they are so slick. I still pop, and it's like, especially now you see 630 splashes and all this stuff. I still pop for the springboard twisting leg drop that Kazarian does, because he just says it so smooth. I'm just like, that's so great. So great.
Yeah. And he's one of those guys that when I first started here in SoCal, like he was a staple. Like he was the guy and the guy that everybody kind of wanted to be at the time. And the fact that he's still going, I'm super proud of him. And Daniels is the same way. Like he was another SoCal guy that was like, it's so great that they're together. And now with Scorpio Sky, as SoCal Uncensored it's kind of does my heart good to see them all together and under that banner and definitely representing SoCal like that, because they've been around for as long as I've, even known about wrestling here in SoCal.
Yeah, as a California indie wrestling nerd, AEW bought a lot of credit with me immediately by like putting like tag team titles on Scorpio Sky and Kazarian first. I was like, well, okay, you guys can mess up a bit, and I'm going to give you guys credit for it, because you've already put a lot of what I'm doing. Now it looks like they're going to push Scorpio Sky in singles, which is great. So I'm excited.
Which is crazy, because I was at one of his first training sessions, Scorpio Sky. Encouraging him to drop kick me up here. And then he almost went over my head. Like he was like, got such good hops. He's an amazing athlete. Yeah.
My friend Jesus, he booked him at a Lucha show when he was still masked in San Francisco. Wow. Yeah. It was like a nightclub. It was a crazy show.
Yeah. That's super cool.
All right. How about some crazy fan interactions besides someone stealing your mask? Cause that's just a dick move.
Yeah. Crazy fan interactions. So we wrestled in Alaska. We wrestled in Fairbanks and Anchorage. And one of I can't remember which show it was, but at one show, they told us that, it was a pretty big arena. So, and they would drop the light. So there's like maybe 5,000 to 7,000 people there. So in Alaska, they were hungry for anything like wrestling, right?
Yeah.
So the promoter came up to us at one point. He says, at some point, and I'm not saying in your match, but at some point in the night, there's going to be a fan and he's going to run into the ring. Now, and we're just like, oh, is this like a planned thing? Or is it like he goes, no, it's just like this guy, it's like his thing to do. He always at some point in a show runs into the ring. The caveat was that they asked us, please don't kill him. That's what they said. They go, please do not kill him, which I thought was really awesome. But he didn't run in our match. I think he ran in like during the Brian Christopher match. But that was a funny, but as far as myself, I think I really knew that I had made it when I was wrestling in a East LA lucha show. And an old lady came up to me. I rolled outside the ring, and an old lady came up to me with a rolled up newspaper and kind of didn't whack me. I won't call it a whack. It more just like gave me like a little tap to the back of the head, because she didn't like my moves. And I thought I had really made it at that point. Like I was finally a luchador.
Based on all the lucha guys we've interviewed, Yeah, that is the thing. It is an old lady will hit you with something at some point at a lucha show if you're really bringing the heat. Because luckily it wasn't a cane. One of the guys I interviewed, a lady straight up with her cane came started whacking at him as he was trying to leave the ring. So there you go.
When I wrestled for Lucha Vavoom, I mean because we would always like. Are you familiar with Lucha Vavoom? Have you ever seen any of those shows? So like they have this big kind of walkway out there. So we would do a lot of dives into the crowd like that. And there was some interesting fan interactions after we had done our dives. Some of them drunk, some of them I'll say frisky, some of them aggressive. And so that was always an interesting. You never knew what you were going to get in that, and they had a lot of security. But when you do that and you kind of go over security and into the crowd, different people do different things. Let's just say.
Besides hurting you, what's the worst thing someone could do in a match when you're working with them?
Berate someone. There's a lot of I wrestled someone who I won't say, but he was an established veteran who wrestled for like WWE, and during my match, he didn't feel it was going the way that he wanted it, and was just not berating me like in a way that's like saying dumb things, but just like saying things like, "Oh, this is so stupid! Like you don't know what you're doing," and or do this and do that, and like it was really. So I understand because he was the veteran in the thing, but like I had done my time at that point, and I think that I was doing everything was going fine in my estimation of everything, but it was like this kind of running dialogue. And it really took me out of the match. And when you do that, it really kind of like, I had a lot of, my head wasn't in the match after that. So I was like, that's when you have the most opportunity for danger and do something dumb and just do something out of like, screw this. If this guy doesn't like this, well, I'm going to give him something not to like. So I didn't want to be that guy. I was never that guy. I never got into wrestling to be that guy. But there's a lot of people who take this seriously, and I understand why they take it seriously. But there's that's that. So doing that type of things, and I've had other people just like, if something doesn't go off as well as you thought it could, like that, sometimes they'll say like, well, that sucked. It's like they'll communicate with each other. They're like, that sucked. And I get that, it's like, but you still have to, one move does not make a match unless it's a finish. If it's a finish that you blow, totally understandable. I can understand why about being upset for that. But if you just, if you slip on something or that's wrestling, that's the struggle. So to have that, it's just, that's the only thing that I could say. I mean, maybe it's more personal to me because I was like, I go, that made a bad situation even worse, so. Yeah.
Well, it's like, if you were working any other kind of job, like if you're two guys working at, Walgreens or whatever, and it's like, oh, look at the way you're stacking stuff. Right. Oh, look at the way you're doing it. Like eventually you're going to be like, fuck this job, man. You know what I mean? Like it's, it's, you're still both professionals. You're still both working with each other. It's kind of like, there has to be a little bit of decorum. Yeah.
And guaranteed the crowd has no knowledge of what's going on that anything was like that, but it's like, it becomes what it is. But I would say that's so minimal, what I'm saying that everybody that I've wrestled, I would say like 90% of the people that I wrestled were like super awesome. So I have no complaints.
Speaking of super awesome, was there a time that you were legitimately surprised by a worker in the ring? Maybe just the way they did things, the way they came, maybe it was someone you hadn't really worked with before that you were like, holy crap, this guy really knows what he's doing. This guy is amazing.
Yeah, and you probably wouldn't know who he is. He was actually like a lucha kid, really, at that time. Like I think he was like 16 at the time, and he actually got thrown into a singles match with me. This was maybe like 2005 or 6, and we literally had about 5 minutes to plan a match. I'm being conservative when I say 5. Like, we just had to go out and have a match, and it was like, okay, do this, and this. Eventually, I'm going to do this and this. Just watch this and then this. And he goes, okay. So we went out there. Oh my God! Like, this kid killed it. Like, he goes, I'm going to go do this. I go, okay. He would just do all this like crazy dives and I mean dives in the ring, but it was like these kind of those like springboard arm drags that lucha. There's all this pomp and circumstance for just like an arm drag. I think that's where Excalibur and I kind of got our arm drag, the arm drag contest for, because everything is like super like 450 an arm drag. It's like that's where we kind of got that. So this kid just came out and just like tore it up, and I remember going back and saying, I go, dude, that was like awesome. Like, anytime you want to wrestle, like, please, like, I would love to wrestle you again. And I never did, unfortunately, but you're right. I also, when I wrestled Austin Aries on one of the Battle of Los Angeles, and I expected that to be a match that I was actually honestly pretty nervous about it, only because it was like the Battle of Los Angeles and kind of what it's become. And I was super happy with how, at that time, Austin Aries was not only he was super over at the time, but not only that, but just a super talent and was going places at the time. And he was, it was great to have a great match with him, and he was super easy to work with. Cole Cabana, same thing. Even like Kikutaro, like he's one of my heroes. I can't believe that I wrestled with him and against him so many times. He was the reason why I went to Japan. But like you have this expectation of who they are and like the perception of them, and you go, oh my God, this guy is so much better than I even gave him credit for, because he does the little things. He's solid as a base, solid as just like technically, like giving me little tips on like, oh, you should do this, and then this. And then I'm like, oh my God, you're right. So like the mind of wrestling is just as much as the physical part of it.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of stuff that you don't really appreciate till later in wrestling too. Like when I heard, again, on Bischoff's podcast, he was talking about why Hogan loved Big Boss Man. And he was like, oh yeah, Big Boss Man, for a big guy, could bump like a champion. He made Hulk Hogan look like a superhero. Yeah. And then like I went back and I started watching some of the stuff like on the network, and I was like, holy crap, Boss Man could move. Yeah. And like you don't think about it, but then like you start to appreciate that stuff a lot more once you're like, you're not, well, I feel like you go through stages as a wrestling fan. You're like, well, this person's not doing anything in the ring, he sucks. And like, but then later on you realize he's actually doing more work than the other guy maybe, because he's got to take a lot of that stuff. Yeah.
There was a guy named Gran Hamada. Mm-hmm. I actually met Gran Hamada when I wrestled in 2005 at an Osaka Pro show, and I was super like enthusiastic to meet him, because he's the type of guy who is a smaller guy, junior heavyweight, has had more like junior titles than like anybody. Like it would take an hour to read off every one of them. But no one wants to be Gran Hamada. Like, but he's worked with everybody, and he's a solid base. Remember, and it was great to see his resurgence in '96 when he was part of that ECW Michinoku crew. And a lot of people talk about like everybody wants to be like Jushin Liger. Another guy that I was super happy to meet. I met him in 2005 as well. And I was like, everybody wants to be Liger, right? But the things that Liger and Gran Hamada do is they can base, they can work with anybody. They're interchangeable. They know how to evolve and devolve into different things. And it's like they're super like confident. And that's something that when you talk about a Shawn Michaels, I'm not sure that he was able to adapt. He could be that one awesome thing, but he couldn't like work with everybody. Yeah. So but that's one of the beauties of Shawn Michaels, that he was like that, because that arrogance is part of his persona. But yeah, like Mr. Excitement used to have a shirt that says "Gran Hamada is my daddy." And I knew that we were going to instantly bond when he had that shirt, because like to appreciate this guy who was very unappreciated was awesome. So shout out to Gran Hamada.
Yeah. Speaking of XPW and stuff, one guy who I always appreciated, got to meet him because I knew Luke back in the day was Vic Grimes was a guy that I was like, that guy, man, despite being able to move for his size really well, also took a lot from a lot of people as far as like, I feel like sometimes I watch wrestling now and people don't know how to catch anyone outside the ring anymore. People do suicide dives and stuff. And sometimes they're like, hey man, everyone pointed that moonsault that Cody did off the cage.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like Wardlow stood like a foot too much to the side. He barely caught his shoulder. I was like, dude, come on, man. But in fairness,
that one is like catching a fly ball.
Yeah.
So I was like,
but then like another one like Ray Phoenix did, and he's amazing. And he did like a crazy like spinning thing to the outside. And there was like 5 people outside and somehow not one of them managed to catch him. And he just landed on his back. And it's kind of like, come on, guys. And I just look at like Vic Grimes' old matches, and Vic Grimes would be like, no, right on my face. It's fine. Just like land right on. Like he didn't give a shit. And I don't know. I just really appreciate someone like that who's just like, I'll do anything. I don't care.
It's like landing on a big bed. But also by the same respect, I also think that people that are doing dives, suicide dives are actually, it's almost like an arrow.
Yeah.
It's supposed to be an offensive move. You're supposed to, it's almost like this knockout punch. I think that if I can say one thing is like doing those dives more straight and as an arrow, it would actually improve a lot of the fault of the people that are catching them. So if you just zero in on their chest instead of over them or trying to land on top of them, it'd be different.
All right. Has a booker tried to stiff you on money?
I tried. Succeeded. Are you kidding me? That's part of wrestling, and it's unfortunate because I wish some wrestling was treated more like a legitimate business. I think that there's a lot of the reason why that happens is there's wrestling is kind of sometimes the enamor is wrestling, right? So the business part of it is out of it, even though that there's an inherent thing that you're going to get paid for this. And granted, there's broken promises, there's all this type of stuff. I was lucky, and I have to say this because I never did wrestling for money. If I did it for money, I would have a much different perspective on this. The fact that I was able to do it and do all the things I did and get compensation for it was cherry on top for me. I lost more money in wrestling than gained it, but I don't look back on it with any scorn, a little bit of scorn, but not enough to. I say it's like an old girlfriend. I'll see her and I'm like, oh yeah, her, So it's like that's the way I kind of look at it now. But yeah, and there's been instances where the pay hasn't been there, or are more things that for me were promises that were not fulfilled, or people coming back and just like all the petty politics of it all. I never liked any of that stuff, and it was always seemed to be inherent with certain people. And these certain people always got a second, third, 15th, 100th chance. And I'm just like, where's the wrestling that I know, like the street justice that would, not let this guy run again. Definitely let this guy know and he can't come around anymore unless he pays these people properly. But that's, again, it's like we're a lot of us were too in love with wrestling to even they're like, oh, we have to pay our dues and do all this stuff. Well, yes and no. You get to a point where, but a lot of that stuff isn't established. And when you're working for somebody for the first time, do you still have to pay your dues with them? And in my graphic design job, if I go and work another job, do I have to pay my dues with them? It's like, I understand it's like a little subculture, but I wish it was treated a little bit better as far as monetarily and business wise.
Yeah, I think Scott Loss put it pretty well when he's like, when he does like art commissions, he's like, I get half the money up front.
Yeah.
Cause I to guarantee that I'm at least getting something for my work here, and then it's kind of like, especially wrestling now where they're actually, before you didn't really sell tickets in advance to a lot of shows in the indie scene, especially it would be mostly, at the door, but now people are, with Ticket Web and like brown paper tickets and all that stuff. People are selling tickets in advance. Hey, maybe you could start paying some guys in advance. You know what I mean? Just maybe.
Yeah. And paying in advance is actually like, I was a lot of people don't understand that concept. Getting paid in advance is actually getting paid for what you're doing.
Yeah.
The second part of the payment is actually your profit. So no matter what, you're going to come out ahead. So that's business right there.
Yeah.
So, if you don't get paid, at least you got paid for doing what you did, but your profit is actually in getting the second part of it.
So actually, one thing I wanted to kind of touch on, you kind of reminded me of it when you're talking about the weird politics and like the stuff that people get away with. So one thing that Luke Hawks mentioned was because he has his own promotion in Louisiana called Wildcat Sports, and like when WrestleMania was down there in Louisiana, you have to have like a specific license to run wrestling. And of course, everyone goes there because they want to run shows because it's WrestleMania weekend. So people were like hitting him up to like use his license, quote unquote, like, co-promote with him in order so that they could run shows there, that kind of thing. And a lot of it was like a lot of people would say, oh yeah, you do this for us, then like we'll do something for you. And then of course, a lot of these people lose his number real quick after they do that.
Sure.
So I was wondering, especially when you're booking and running PWG, did you ever encounter people who were like, oh yeah, book my guys on a show and like we'll book your guys on a thing, and then like they didn't end up doing it or anything like that kind of thing?
Well, if they did, it would never be twice. So Super Dragon was really awesome about that. He had an elephant's memory when it came to anybody who had screwed him in the past, anybody who he didn't want to work with. And that actually saved a lot of time and effort because like at times we didn't book our friends. We booked what was best for business and the best matches. So I think Scott even mentioned about the belt thing. Like we had actually put money to a guy, I think in Florida, and he never came through with the belts. And, so we actually, like I said, it never happened twice. We actually, we didn't do very many deals with people. The deals that we did were usually, the stuff that got us to Europe. Our little deals with basically the wrestlers to, get them in. I think some of the CCW at that time and Ring of Honor and TNA we had to do deals with, but they were always very professional about it. So it saved a lot of time, but we didn't deal with people that we knew were flaky. And so that eliminated a lot of mistakes and a lot of times that getting into something that we didn't want to get into.
Did any of your wrestler friends who maybe weren't necessarily super over or very skilled, to put it kindly, did any of them ever give you flack like, oh, how come I can't get booked to PWG? How come I can't? Did you get that a lot, especially like when it was going real hot?
I had a very big one that I unfortunately I wish I could go on the slander tour because I could do it, but I'm not going to. But I have somebody who actually came up to me and was very upset that I didn't book him specifically on our shows, and that would happen a lot. I started getting calls from people saying, "Hey, I'd like to get on your shows," and stuff like that. We were really laser focused on what we were trying to build, who was in that model and who wasn't. There was times when we would try different things and they didn't work and we shut them down immediately. And there was a time when the Bucks, and they talk about this too, where the Bucks weren't in great favor with us because of like some early training that we went through. And it was only because of, and it was, if you know the Bucks, like we know them now, we're much better friends, and we kind of came up a very similar way. We knew what was going on, but again, you can't put the cart in front of the horse. But they had to go through that kind of vetting process. So, but yeah, the wrestling's weird. Wrestling will always be weird.
Yeah.
So there's always gonna you're always gonna have these things that are gonna make you question, like, are we doing the right thing, or is it good to get into this? We're always looking to expand as well. Like, what can we do to make more money? What can we make? What can we to raise attendance? 100. Should we do this? Should we do this? And, I was actually, I was toying with the idea of actually making like almost like a season ticket for PWG. This was like maybe in 2006, where it's like they had access, kind of like what they do now, where it's like you get access to like an hour of their time. You can do autographs and a meet and greet. And I just didn't have the capacity to kind of flush out the idea. It just never really happened. It seemed preposterous at the time. Now it's like the way they do things. So I was trying to figure out other ways to do that. Like, oh, do we get more sponsors? Do we do this? And do we, it's like, but when you get sponsors and you've taken money from people, you have to value their input and they actually have control over it. So we were very careful about giving away that power.
Let's see here. What's the best mistake you've made in pro wrestling?
I would say doing it in the first place. I mean, I have to say that it was a mistake that I tried to do it. It was a mistake that I pursued it. It was a mistake getting into it and trying to make PWG a business. It was a mistake doing all this. Do I regret it? Some of it. Do I regret all of it? No. That's the thing. It's like about living life and kind of pursuing something. Like your envisionment of what it is and what it could be is sometimes bigger than what it will be. But that never stopped me. I was glad to be naive about it. In my first training session that I did, I don't know why I was told to do this, but we did sunset flips, and as I went over the guy, instead of my feet landing and me bringing him over, I jumped over, and about midway he went back. So basically I just pile drive myself and he just landed on me in a sunset flip.
Wow.
And I tweaked my neck. It was one of those things where you just go, oh my God, like this is wrestling. This is what I'm getting myself into. And even in my first match in Mexico, like it went so badly, and it was not what I expected. And it was, but it was still that little bit like Super Dragon and Excalibur. They're just like, come on, we need you in this. Come on, just keep on going and do all this stuff. And it just basically, it's like, I got to at least see how far, what I can do. And it just, again, it's like gambling. You never know if you just keep on hitting it, and then you crap out, and then all of a sudden something else comes up. And so like just even doing it in the first place was probably my biggest mistake. But hey, you live and learn.
What's the hardest you've laughed at an indie show?
Oh my gosh, that is a great question. I tell you, like there's so many times that, I mean, just wrestling with like Ebasan and Kashimbo Kamen, wrestling with Top Gun Talwar. I mean, like we all the things that we would do, and in the ring, it was like so fun just to be part of that. When Kevin Steen and El Generico were around, and Chris Bosch, like we were always like laughing. That's one thing that I do regret. If I have another regret in wrestling, is that I did not laugh enough. Wrestling was so fun for me. I took it real seriously, and I probably wasn't the person that I really wanted to be. And that's something that I wish I would have done more. A lot of the laughing was in the matches. Mr. Excitement was another guy that we always laugh with, because he had a Puerto Rican personality and would always just say fun things in the ring. Being in there, like getting to know Rocky Romero and Ricky Reyes when they wrestled as the Cubanitos is great. Frankie Kazarian's hilarious. Like we would just talk about baseball and comedy. Davey Richards, we talk about like the Jerky Boys and this guy named Phil Hendry, who is a radio commentator.
Yeah, Phil Hendry, yeah.
M Dog is another guy who's like totally like amazing. Quicksilver, another guy. Like we could laugh so much about everything. Dino Winwood, Bob Ramos, another guy that's like, that guy makes me laugh tremendously. But yeah, like we with Excalibur and Super Dragon, we laugh so much. And I do miss that aspect of it.
You've wrestled all over. What's the worst gimmick you've seen?
Oh, I remember you asking Scott Lost this. So I'll say worst only because he's kind of known as the worst in a sense. When I wrestled in Osaka in 2005, there's a wrestler named Ultraman Robin, and he if you know Taro's gimmick, it's a chubbier, almost the same size, a chubbier version of it. So but he's known as like this kind of, when I say indie wrestler, not even an indie wrestler, like he's a guy who just like dresses up in a like Ultraman costume that maybe is Ultraman. It's like low rent Ultraman, but he would wrestle everywhere. In fact, I just saw him. He was on a Michinoku Pro show. They had this like marathon match. It was like all these Star Wars characters in it, and like Great Sasuke like wins it every year or something like that. But he was in that match, and I wrestled him. Actually, it was the last match I ever did in Japan. I wrestled him for this promotion called FUCK, and it's an acronym, but it's this really super grungy garbage indie, and it was one of my biggest paydays in Japan. And someone bought my mask too. It was like, I think I got like $800 in total for wrestling for this little garbage indie to wrestle this guy. And it was fun. I'll just say it was fun because I kept on calling him Taro. I go, Taro, how'd you make it over here? I go, you put on a bit of weight, and no one knew what I was saying the whole time.
That's fucking great. That's crazy. Your the biggest payday was the friggin'.
Isn't that great? Yeah, who would have known?
That's wrestling though. Any besides the guy you were talking about earlier who was being a dick in the ring, any quote big name guys that you worked on a show with you that thought they were better than the show, acted like they were better than the show, just came across poorly?
Some people they were the guys, I would say, like the guys that were already had been established and kind of made it. The one thing that I always loved is when like the ex WWE or WCW guys that we would be on the shows, even the Lucha guys that were, like I wrestled with like Elio Del Santo and LA Park and guys like that, and a lot of other like Blue Demon and Negro Casas, and so there's all these people that you would think would have these super huge egos, and a lot of them didn't. But the people that did, I felt almost like bad for them, that it seemed like just angry. And when for me, like there was a lot of, I had a lot of anger type of issues about like, and I knew the things that irritated me. So like adversity or frustration really super got me agitated and took me to a place that I didn't like to be. And I can only imagine them and their lifestyle, traveling. Things are not easy. Things are definitely not the same as they used to be. They're not looked at in the same light. The window is very small for stardom in this business. So in a sense, I felt a bit bad for them. So I didn't really harsh them about it, but I more felt empathy for them. But like when I saw them treating other people badly, that's when it was hard. It was even harder to watch.
It reminds me of when that movie The Wrestler came out. And I was like, as like the more nerdy wrestling person of a lot of my friends, I was like, you have no idea how realistic this movie is. So I was like the scene with him and walking in the thing with the fanny pack, and they're in like the hotel ballroom, like on these tables and all these. I'm like, oh my God, this is like every wrestling like convention thing I've ever been to. This is insane. It just makes me like think about like, when people reach a certain level and then it comes crashing down and they're like, I don't know how, like mentally, maybe they just weren't able to kind of compartmentalize that. You know what I mean? They're just kind of like, frustrated. I think frustrated is the word that you use, and I think that's probably correct.
Yeah, there was a documentary, it was a bigger, faster, stronger, or same guy. He did that, but he was talking about how I think it was his brother was trying to pursue that WWF dream or E dream, and he just didn't have it, but he was always trying to pursue it and keep on going. And being an accountant didn't have the same like allure as like being a WWE wrestler, which is totally understandable. For me, I was lucky, whereas like I had my day job and my graphic design career, so wrestling was always like, cake, because like, it's like, it was always something that's like, if I do this, like it's way more than I expected, and I'm lucky to get this opportunity, and I'm lucky that I can fulfill it in a high capacity and not go out there and just make a fool out of myself. And there's been times when I've, messed up, obviously, but I felt that I could hold my weight and do well in it and participate at a high level. Even though it wasn't my dedicated vocation. So yeah, so that I was always lucky in that sense. But so, again, it was all about going back to empathy and more just kind of seeing it from their perspective rather than saying like, oh, this guy's stupid or whatever.
And finally, I call it the touchy-feely question. The last one here: what is your pure joy in wrestling? Whether it be before, during, or after the match, the thing that gives you goosebumps, that makes you go, this is why I fucking loved this business. This is why I got into it. This is what I did this for.
Well, one of the things that I always thought it was having a good match. Like, oh, I can't wait to have a good match. The thing about having a good match is you want to do it again and again and again and again. The thing that I found that was a great comfort, Mr. Excitement and I talk about this all the time, is our things that after we'd have our matches, we'd go eat somewhere and hang out and talk and laugh and reminisce and talk about the future and have those shared experiences. I'm a huge baseball nerd, so we talk about baseball. We talk about basketball because the Lakers were good at that time. And my team is the Phoenix Suns, and they're perpetually awful every year. So we'd always laugh about that. And we just would talk about the things. So one of the things I got to do was I would always look forward to eating afterwards, wherever we were. Because I knew at that time the pressure of the match is off. We could actually relax and talk and actually not have to worry about being somewhere or doing something.
All right. And with that, we just about reached the end here, but I'd like to have you put yourself over. You just kind of segued into it without knowing, talking about baseball.
Yeah.
Please tell us where we can check you out talking about beer and baseball.
Yes, we do a weekly show on Tuesdays at 6 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time. It is the Beer Baseball blog on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, and we're also on Instagram too. Check us out. It is Angelo Trinidad. He was a former ring announcer for Pro Wrestling Guerrilla and Mach 1. I want to give shout out to Johnny In, who passed away earlier this year. And Taro. The former Taro, Kevin Lyon, is with us too. We do it every Tuesday. I also do that's the Beer Baseball blogcast. The Beer Baseball, if you look up Beer Baseball blog on any social media, we're there. I'm doing a Beer Baseball blog interview series. I just interviewed Gabe Ramirez from Pro Wrestling Revolution. Be interviewing the Myrtle Beach Pelicans general manager. They're the affiliate for the Cubs. And so we're all in on beer and baseball. It's talking about the adventures of craft beer and baseball. Before the pandemic, I would go around and travel to all these baseball parks, minor league, independent, major league, and taste all the craft beers and journal about all the experiences. And it was getting really good and got shut down. So they have baseball now. It doesn't feel the same, but we're all super baseball like. When I say nerds, it's nerd squared. Like we have a lot of fun every Tuesday, and also want to give August 18th. We're actually going to have a Beer Baseball blogcast, but it's also the anniversary of the death of Brody Stevens, who took his life. Brody Stevens, for those who don't know, is a comedian. And he suffered with mental illness. He was very open about his mental illness. And I feel like that if he treated it with medication and all these other things, and eventually took his own life, it was a spot that I could definitely relate with, and it's something that I fear out there with all this pandemic and everything that's going on. Mental health is such a big issue. My girlfriend suffers from fibromyalgia. In her community, suicide is a very big issue, and she started a nonprofit called Support Fibro. If you look that up on the internet, it helps all these people in food deserts and getting help. So mental health is a very big issue with me. And for those who also don't know, August 18th is 818 until I die. I'm literally 818. I have an 818 phone number. But I also grew up I didn't grow up in the San Fernando Valley, but that's where I moved when I first was here. I have a huge connection to Brody and his baseball. So if you're struggling with mental health, please do something about it. I go to therapy once every week, and I wish I would have done it a lot sooner. So please get the help that you need. And if you don't, reach out to someone that you love. They will be there for you.
Absolutely. Thank you, sir. I appreciate you being on the show today. And thank you for raising awareness on such a worthy cause.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you very much.